The year was 1870. The Arizona Territory was a skillet, and the sun was the fire. Ashki Nez read the land, not for what it was, but for what it would be in the next hour. He led 3 wagons, families drawn west by posters that promised paradise and delivered dust. He was their scout, a man they paid to see the unseen. He rode ahead, his body loose in the saddle, but his eyes were hard. The air was wrong. It was thick, heavy, carrying the metallic scent of distant rain that would never touch this dry patch of ground. It smelled like violence. He guided the small train into the mouth of a deep arroyo, the canyon walls offering a sliver of shade. The settlers were grateful for the relief from the sun. Ashki felt only the trap. He looked up. The sky was a slit of bruised purple. He tasted copper on his tongue. He raised his hand. "Stop," he commanded. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the creak of the wagon wheels. The lead driver, a man with a sunburned neck, spat tobacco juice. "What for? It's shady here." "Water," Ashki said. The man laughed. "Water? This ditch ain't seen water in a year." "It will see it in 1 minute," Ashki replied. He turned his horse, motioning them back. "Move, now." The rumble started then. Not a sound, but a vibration in the teeth. It came before the roar. A wall of churning brown water, 6 feet high, carrying rocks and whole trees, flooded the canyon. The wagon scrambled backward. A small boy, no more than 7, had wandered from the second wagon to chase a lizard. He froze, caught between the rising water and the steep rock wall. The mother screamed, a raw sound that the canyon swallowed. Ashki was already moving. He did not think about the risk. He thought only of the small shape. His horse, trained for this land, plunged into the edge of the rising torrent. He uncoiled his rope, the loop singing as it left his hand. It settled over the boy's shoulders. Ashki pulled, the horse fighting the sucking mud. The water tore at them. He hauled the child up, slick with mud, and threw him onto the bank before wheeling his horse to safety. The mother wept, clutching the boy. The father, the one who had doubted, stared, his face the color of ash. Ashki just sat his horse, coiling his rope. The water thundered past. He had saved one, but the ghosts of the others were always with him. He saw them clearly, the blue uniforms of the cavalry patrol, falling in the dust of the canyon ambush. He saw the surprise in their eyes. He had been their scout. He had led them, and he had been blamed. The memory was sharp as a fresh wound. Captain Royce Hale, his face tight with false piety, reading the charge of betrayal. The scout led them into a trap. The words echoed, but Hale knew the truth. Hale, with his cold eyes, had planned the ambush himself, a secret deal for munitions, blaming the Navajo to cover his tracks. Ashki had been the perfect scapegoat. That shame was why he was here, guiding civilians for $10 a week. A man without a people, a warrior without his honor. 400 miles east. Eliza Hart stepped out of a freight car into the glare of dusty mesa. The year was also 1870, but her journey had been measured by rail ties, not canyons. She did not belong. She had paid the brakeman $2 silver to unlatch the door, and she stood on the raw lumber platform, clutching the handle of a trunk that seemed to hold the weight of her entire past. Dusty Mesa was not a town. It was a scar, raw and new, a collection of tents, clapboard buildings, and hopeful false fronts. It smelled of sawdust, stale beer, and the ever-present, choking dust. Her dark wool dress, practical in Boston, was an oven here. She was tall, her features plain but organized around a jaw of stubborn strength. She had come west not for gold or a husband, but for a purpose. The trunk was her anchor. Inside, beneath the few dresses, were the tools of her trade: Shakespeare, the Bible, McGuffey's readers, primers for arithmetic, and nestled on top, the letter. The paper was thin. The ink faded. the handwriting shaky. It was the last will and testament of the woman who had raised her, her adoptive mother. A physician of quiet strength had written it in her final days. Eliza, my girl, I am sending you where I once worked. Do not just teach them to read the words. Teach them to read the world. Teach them fairness. Teach them the words that make men equal, not just the words that make them rich. It was a promise made at a deathbed, and now, in this wilderness of dust, it was a debt to be paid. She hired a man with a wheelbarrow for 2 bits to move the trunk. She walked, taking the measure of the main street. It was an argument between chaos and aspiration. She saw the small, hopeful shape of a church, its cross barely higher than the saloon next door. The ring of a hammer on steel drew her gaze. Miguel Ortega's smithy. The smith, a man of Mexican heritage, worked with a steady, powerful rhythm. Ignoring the heat, his hammer was the town's heartbeat, hot and insistent. The clean smell of hot iron cut through the dust. Mabel Quinn's boarding house was the only building with 2 stories and a coat of proud green paint. Mabel herself, a black woman whose posture declared she owned the ground she stood on, watched Eliza approach. Her eyes had seen settlers come and go. She did not offer pity for Eliza's struggle, but she offered a clean room for $3 a week, payable in advance. Eliza paid. She left the trunk and walked. The sheriff's office? She paused, her Boston sensibilities intrigued. A woman sat inside, her boots crossed on the desk. A tin star pinned to her dusty vest, Deputy Ruth Calder. A group of freighters sauntered past, tipping their hats in broad mockery. "Mornin', Deputy." "Keepin' the peace," one called. "Don't you arrest nobody too hard. Now." Another laughed. Deputy Ruth did not move, her face carved from seasoned oak, her gaze fixed on the street. Eliza felt a strange kinship with the woman's isolation. She saw the rest, Navajo families near the general store, their blankets vibrant against the brown landscape. They traded turquoise for flour, their faces impassive, their eyes missing nothing. They were watchful, wary. They did not belong here either. And then she saw the men who truly owned the street, men in city coats and bowler hats, their boots clean, Pinkerton agents. They walked with a swagger that came from the gun on their hip and the power of the man who paid them. They were the shadow of the railroad, the shadow of Silas Brandt. That evening, in the dining room of Mabel's, Eliza ate beans and bacon. She listened. The talk was not of gold strikes or cattle prices. It was of water, a place the Navajo called Tubia, the winter warm water, a series of springs, warm enough to keep the snow off the grass, a place where herds could survive the brutal cold. "It's life," a gaunt freighter said, wiping his mouth. "Whoever holds that spring holds this whole territory by the throat come winter." The rumors were thick as molasses. Silas Brandt, the man whose name was on the railroad survey stakes, wanted it. He needed it for his engines, for the silver mines he planned to open. "Heard he's buying the rights," a shopkeep muttered. "Buying from who?" another asked. "That's Navajo land. Has been." "Not according to Captain Hale," the first man said, lowering his voice. "Hale says the army's clearing 'em out, says their grazing is trespassing, making way for progress." An old man at the corner table spoke, his voice dry as the dust. "There's a treaty, an old paper, signed by a pastor and a chief, says that water belongs to the people, but the paper is lost." Eliza stopped eating. A lost paper, a captain twisting the law, progress that smelled of theft. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Teach them fairness. Ashki rode into Dusty Mesa after dark. He did not use the main street. He used the alleys, moving like a shadow. He went to the back of Miguel's smithy. Miguel was a friend, one of the few. Ashki needed strong steel shoes for his horse, shoes that would grip rock. He heard the talk from the saloon spill into the night. Brandt, Hale, the water. He knew that water. It was the lifeblood of his grandmother's people. He gripped the hot steel bar Miguel offered him. The justice of a gun had failed him. The ambush had proven that. A gun was loud, but it settled nothing. It only made bigger graves. He needed something quiet and strong. He needed the truth. The lost treaty? That paper was the only thing that could stop Hale's soldiers and Brant's money. It was the only thing that could restore his name and save his people. In her small room at Mabel's, Eliza washed her face in the basin. The water was lukewarm and silty. She looked at her reflection. A schoolteacher. A woman, alone. What could she do? She held her mother's letter. She thought of the lost treaty. Teach them the words that make men equal. A treaty was a contract. A contract was justice, made of ink and promises. She believed in the law. Even here, she believed in the power of the written word. Ignorance was the real enemy. If people could be taught, they could not be so easily cheated. The next morning, Eliza walked to the edge of town. The schoolhouse stood there, or rather, it leaned. It was a skeleton, picked clean by wind and neglect. The windows were hollow eyes. Birds nested in the rafters. The door hung on one rusted hinge. It was a ruin. She put her shoulder to the door. The wood groaned. A sound of protest. She pushed harder. With a shriek of tortured metal, the door swung open. Dust motes, thick as snow, danced in the single shaft of morning light. It smelled of decay and desert heat. It was a start. Miles away, on the high mesa ridge that overlooked the entire valley, Ashki Nez stood. The sun was rising behind him, painting the cliffs in shades of apricot and blood. He watched the town of Dusty Mesa far below. He saw the faint plume of smoke from Miguel's smithy. He saw the small, broken building at the edge of the dust, the one whose door had just opened. His shadow fell long before him, a dark finger of the mountain stretching down the slope. It pointed directly at the schoolhouse. The two of them were in the same valley, their paths set. They had not yet seen each other, but the drought was coming, and the fight for the water would see to that. Eliza Hart spent 3 days waging war on the schoolhouse. She used a shovel for the packed dirt and rat nests, a borrowed broom for the curtains of cobwebs, and a bucket of lye water for the grime that covered the floors and the one remaining bench. The work was brutal, blistering her hands, but with every scrape, she felt she was claiming the ground. On the 4th day, she returned to Mabel's boarding house to retrieve the trunk, her books, her real tools. She paid 2 boys a dime to help her load it onto a handcart. The sun was a hammer, beating the street into a dusty anvil. She pushed the cart herself, her muscles screaming. She was halfway to the schoolhouse when 2 men stepped out from the alley beside the smithy. They were not cowboys. They wore greasy wool coats despite the heat and had the dead-eyed look of men who moved freight for the railroad and drank their pay. "That's a heavy load, ma'am," the first one said, smiling. He was missing 3 front teeth. "Please, let me pass," Eliza said, gripping the handcart. "We just want to help," the second one said. He grabbed the cart. "In fact, we'll take it off your hands." "Let go!" she shouted. The first man shoved her. It was not a violent push, but it was firm. She stumbled back, falling into the dust, the indignity stinging more than the impact. He was laughing. "Go on back to the hotel, lady. This is man's work." They tipped the handcart, spilling the trunk onto the ground. They grabbed the handles, one on each end, and began hauling it back toward the alley. She screamed for help. "Stop thieves!" The street was empty, caught in the midday stupor. Miguel was shoeing a horse, the ring of his hammer loud. Deputy Ruth was nowhere to be seen. The men disappeared into the alley. Eliza scrambled to her feet, tears of pure rage blurring her vision. She ran after them, but they were gone. High on the ridge, Ashki Nez had been watching the town. He did not watch the town itself, but the spaces between the buildings. He saw the teacher, the woman with the stiff back, pushing the cart. He saw the 2 men. He recognized them. Low-grade thugs, men who haunted the saloons. always flush with cash after one of Brant's Pinkertons bought a round. He watched them take the trunk. He watched the woman fall. He turned his horse and moved down the slope, not running, but flowing over the terrain. He cut across the back of the town, his horse's hooves making no sound in the soft dust. He found them a quarter-mile out. In a dry wash, arguing over how to open the lock, one was trying to shoot it off with a pistol. "You'll ruin what's inside, you fool," the other one said, holding a rock. "Let me smash it." Ashki dismounted 20 yards away. They did not hear him. "That does not belong to you," he said. The men spun around, their hands dropping to their guns. They saw him, a single Navajo, standing by his horse. They relaxed. "Well, look here," the toothless one sneered. "Come to get a share. Have you—" "I have come to take it back," Ashki said. The man with the pistol raised it. "I think you've come to die." Ashki moved. He was not a brawler. He was a warrior. He closed the distance in 3 steps. He deflected the pistol hand upward. The gun fired. The sound flat in the open air. He struck the man's throat with the heel of his hand. The man crumpled, gagging. The second one raised the rock. Ashki took it from him, twisting the man's wrist until he heard a small snap. The man howled, clutching his arm. Ashki hit him once, behind the ear. He fell on top of his friend. Ashki looked at the 2 of them, then at the trunk. He had not drawn his knife. He had not needed to. He righted the trunk, lifted its considerable weight, and lashed it to the back of his saddle. He rode back to the schoolhouse. Eliza was there, her face streaked with dust and tears, hopelessly sweeping the same patch of dirt. She heard the horse and looked up, fear flashing in her eyes, turning to confusion. He dismounted, untied the heavy trunk, and set it on the ground by the broken door. She stared at him, then at the trunk. "How?" "I saw them take it," he said. His voice was low, careful. Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" He looked at his hands. They were steady. They were not. He paused, searching for the word. "Fighters." He turned to leave. "Wait," she called. I do not have any money to pay you." "I did not ask for money." "Who are you?" He looked at her. Her face was earnest, her eyes intelligent. They were the eyes of a person who did not belong here, but who had refused to leave. "My name is Ashki Nez." "I am Eliza Hart," she said, extending a hand. He looked at her hand, a gesture he did not understand. He nodded his head once, a gesture she did not understand. He mounted his horse and was gone. Eliza hurried to the trunk. The lock was gone, shot away. One corner was blackened, singed. The men had tried to light a fire against it. She opened the lid. The smell of burnt paper and linen rose up. Her books were mostly safe, but the items on top were charred. She pulled out a scorched linen blouse, ruined, and beneath it, the packet of her mother's letters. The fire had eaten the edges, leaving the ink in the center. She pulled out the final letter, the one with the instructions. The edges crumbled to black ash in her fingers. But the words were clear. "Your father's people, though he never knew them. I served them. I saved a child from the fever, and in return, they saved me. They are treated poorly. Eliza, there is a paper, a promise, the old pastor, the one who vanished. He knew. He kept the winter water deed with God's word, proof of fairness. It is in his blue-covered Bible. Find it. For me." Eliza sat on the dusty floor of the schoolhouse, the world tilting. Winter water deed, the very thing the men in the saloon had spoken of. Her mother, the Boston physician, had known about it. Her mission, a simple promise to teach, had just become something vast and dangerous. The next day, the heat broke like a fever. The air grew thick. At the public well, the line was 20 men deep. The crank and bucket system was slow. A rancher, his face burned raw, was filling a second barrel. A miner, his clothes stiff with sweat and silver ore, shoved him. "That's enough. Sutton, my mule is dying." Get your hand off me, you dirt scratcher," Sutton growled, shoving back. "My cat'll come before your damn mule." The fist fight was sudden and ugly. They fell into the dust, rolling and cursing. In a moment, it was not 2 men, but 10, miners against ranchers. The old grievance, land versus water, exploding in the heat. Ashki was at the back of the line, his canteens empty. He watched. He did not move. This was the white man's fight, a scramble for scraps. On the porch of the saloon, 2 Pinkerton agents watched, smoking cigars. One of them laughed and pointed. They were fanning the flames, encouraging the hatred. If the townsfolk fought each other, they would never see the real thief. The chaos was broken by the sound of shod hooves. Captain Royce Hale rode into the center of the fray, flanked by 2 cavalrymen in dusty blue. Hale was a man who looked clean even in the dust, his uniform pressed, his beard neatly trimmed. "Enough," he roared. His voice carried the authority of the United States Army. The fight stopped. Men spat blood and picked up their hats. Hale's cold gaze swept the crowd. It landed on Ashki. A smile of pure malice touched his lips. "Well, look who it is," Hale announced, his voice ringing with contempt. "The traitor scout! What are you doing here? Nez selling your services to settlers now." He looked at the miners, or just waiting to lead them into another canyon for an ambush. The crowd turned. The miners' faces, already angry, hardened with suspicion. Ashki stood still, his hand resting on his knife. He said nothing. His honor was a stone in his gut. "That's a lie." The voice was clear, sharp, and female. Eliza Hart stepped through the line of men. She had come for water. She faced the captain. "I do not know what happened in a canyon, Captain, but I know that man retrieved my property from thieves yesterday. And I know he has as much right to this water as any man here. The well is public. That means for everyone." Hale was so surprised he almost laughed. He stared at her, this tall, plain woman in a dark dress. "And who, in God's name, are you?" "My name is Eliza Hart. I am the new schoolteacher." "The schoolteacher?" Hale sneered. "Well, Miss Hart, you are new here. I suggest you learn your place. It is not in the middle of a brawl. And it is certainly not speaking for a traitor." He turned to Ashki. "Get out of here. Nez, your presence disturbs the peace." Ashki looked at Hale. Then his gaze moved to Eliza. She was shaking, but she did not back down. She was a troublemaker. He turned and walked away, his canteen still empty. That evening, Silas Brandt himself paid a call to Mabel's boarding house. He was a large man, dressed in an expensive Eastern suit. He smelled of bay rum and money. He found Eliza on the porch, trying to catch a non-existent breeze. "Miss Hart," he said, removing his hat. His voice was smooth as oiled machinery. "Silas Brandt, I am the man bringing the railroad and progress to this fine territory." "Mr. Brandt," she said, inclining her head, "I hear you have taken up residence in the old schoolhouse. A noble, if dusty, endeavor." He chuckled. "I am here to make you an offer. I wish to buy that lot. It is the perfect location for a new railroad warehouse." He named a price. It was generous. $500. Eliza thought of the well. She thought of her mother's letter. "Thank you, Mr. Brandt, but no, I came here to open a school, and that is what I intend to do." Brandt's smile did not falter, but his eyes went flat. "A pity. Progress has a way of clearing its own path. Miss Hart, think on my offer." He left. Later, Mabel Quinn brought Eliza a glass of water. "I saw Brandt leave. He wanted to buy the school lot." Eliza said. Mabel sat down. "Honey, that man does not want a warehouse. That schoolhouse lot sits right on top of the aquifer. The source for the public well. You control that land. You control the well. He does not want to buy it. He wants to own the water. The weight of it settled on Eliza. This was the fight her mother had sent her into. The next morning, she walked to the small cemetery on the hill. It was overgrown with creosote bush. She found the small cluster of graves from the diphtheria epidemic 6 years before, her mother's specialty, and she found the simple wooden cross, half-rotted, for Pastor Davies, the man who vanished, the man with the blue Bible. She put her hand on the marker. "I will find it," she whispered. "I will teach them fairness." Ashki rode hard, past the territory line, to the high canyons where his grandmother, Adani, kept her small herd of sheep. He found her, a woman whose face was a map of the land. Weaving a blanket, he sat before her. He did not speak for a long time. "Finally," he said, "they speak of a paper, a treaty for the Biyah, signed by the pastor." Adani did not stop weaving. "It is real. He was a good man. He believed in the written word of his God and the spoken word of our people. He held it for us, a shield against the railroad men." "It is lost," Ashki said. "Then it must be found," she replied. "Hale has named me a traitor. Brant is moving his machines." "The names they call you do not change who you are," she said, her voice quiet as the wind. "The water is our life. It is the blood of the land. It cannot be stolen." Ashki stood. He placed his hand on the stone of the canyon wall. "I will not let them steal it." It was a vow. His first stop was the church in Dusty Mesa. He went at night. He did not need a light. He moved through the small building, searching for the pastor's old quarters. He found the small desk, the empty shelves. Nothing, no books, no blue Bible. Someone, long ago, had already taken it. He was leaving when a figure stepped from the shadows of the livery. "Looking for something." "Ashkay." It was Deputy Ruth Calder. Her gun was in her hand, pointed at the ground. "The church is not my place," he said. "No, it is not." She stepped closer. "I saw you at the well. I heard what Hale said, and I saw the schoolteacher stand up for you." Ashki watched her. He did not trust badges. "I know you are looking for that treaty," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "So is Brant. I am the law, but the law in this town is bought. Hale and Brant own the judge. My hands are tied." She looked at him, her eyes clear in the moonlight. "But yours are not, and neither are hers. You two, you are outside the system. You might be the only ones who can find that paper before Brant drills his first well." Ashki said nothing. He slipped into the darkness. He rode back to the wash where he had left the two thieves. They were gone. He dismounted, walking the ground, reading the story. They had not been alone. He saw the tracks of a third horse, a shod horse, a heavy rider, a Pinkerton. He kicked at the ashes of the small, cold fire they had made to burn the lock. Something glinted. He knelt, pulling a small metal object from the soot. He wiped it clean on his pants. It was a Pinkerton badge. The enamel cracked and bubbled from the heat. He closed his fist around the sharp edges. The robbery was not random. It was a message. They were searching for something. Brant was searching, and he was willing to burn the whole world down to find it. The town of Dusty Mesa had drawn a line, invisible but as real as a barbed wire fence. On one side were the railroad, the fort, and the money. On the other side were the dust, the ranchers, and the natives. In the middle was the well, and the ground was cracking. A Navajo woman, known for her skill with herbs, died of a fever that a proper doctor could have cured. Her family, quiet and wrapped in grief, brought her body to the churchyard. They had known Pastor Davies, and he had promised them a place of rest. But Pastor Davies was gone. The new man, Pastor Blevins, was thin and pale, a man who looked like he had never seen the sun. He met them at the Lich Gate, his hands steepled. "I am sorry for your loss," he said. his voice carrying no sorrow at all. "But this ground is consecrated. It is for believers. I cannot permit a heathen burial here." The family stood, stunned by the coldness of the refusal. Miguel Ortega, who had known the woman, stepped forward. "Pastor," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She was a good woman. She helped many in this town." "The rules are the rules," Blevins said, adjusting his collar. He was looking past them, at the Pinkerton agent watching from the saloon porch. Eliza Hart, carrying a plank she had salvaged for her schoolhouse floor, stopped. She put the wood down. She walked directly to the pastor. "By whose rules, sir?" she asked. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the afternoon heat. Blevins turned to her. "Miss Hart, the rules of the church, the rules of decency." Decency? Eliza felt a cold anger she had not known she possessed. "A family is in grief, and you deny them comfort. You deny a woman a final place of rest. That is not decency. That is cruelty." "You are new here, Miss Hart," Blevins said, his face tightening. "You do not understand our ways." "I understand the ways of a bully," she said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "You are using your God as a shield for your own lack of courage." A murmur went through the crowd. The Pinkerton agent pushed off the post and walked closer. Blevins's face went from pale to red. "This is sacrilege. I will not have it." He turned his back and bolted the church door. The sound was a heavy, final thud. The Navajo family quietly lifted their burden and walked away, back toward the canyons. Miguel stared at the bolted door, his fist clenching and unclenching. Eliza stood, shaking, the injustice of it settling in her stomach like spoiled food. The town had been split, and she had just publicly chosen her side. That night, they met. The invitation was a whisper from Mabel Quinn. "The smithy, 10 o'clock." The forge was banked, but the heat of the day was still trapped in the iron tools. It smelled of metal and coal smoke. Mabel was there, her arms crossed. Miguel stood by his anvil. Deputy Ruth Calder was in the shadows, her badge invisible in the gloom. "You made a powerful enemy today, Miss Hart," Mabel said. "He is not the enemy," Ruth corrected, stepping forward. "He is the enemy's dog. Brant is the enemy. And Hale." She looked tired. "That woman, she did not just die. Hale's men diverted the water wagon from her camp 2 days ago. They are calling it rationing." "They are calling it murder," Miguel said, his voice thick. He struck the anvil once with his hammer, a single, sharp ring of pure fury that made them all jump. "They are trying to break us, to make us leave. The funeral, the water. It is a slow strangulation. Then we must find a way to breathe." Eliza said. She told them about her mother's letter, the winter water deed, the blue-covered Bible, the vanished pastor. Ruth nodded, her face grim. "Pastor Davies, he was a good man. He believed in the law. He told me once he kept all his important papers in his cabin, a retreat he built on Red Mountain. He said the town was getting too loud for God." "The cabin," Eliza said, her heart quickening. "Is it still there?" "As far as I know," Ruth said. "But it is a 2-day ride, through hard country, and Brant's men are everywhere." "I will go," Eliza said. "You will not go alone," a voice said from the open doorway. Ashki Nez stood there, silent as the shadows he had emerged from. His brother, Natonis, younger and quicker, stood beside him. "We heard the family mourn. We know the pastor's cabin." Eliza looked at him. The man who had saved her trunk, the man she had defended at the well. "You would help me." "It is not you I am helping," Ashki said, his gaze hard. "I am helping my people. That deed is our word. We leave now." They rode out under a sliver of moon, 3 horses moving through the arroyos to avoid the main trail. Ashki led. Eliza followed, and Natonis watched their back. They rode for hours. The land rising, the air growing thin and cold. They came to a deep ravine, spanned by an old wooden bridge built by prospectors years ago. The river below was a muddy trickle. Ashki held up his hand. "Wait!" He dismounted and walked onto the bridge. He tested a plank with his foot. The wood groaned, a sound like a bone breaking. "It is weak," he said. "We cross one at a time." He led his horse across. The bridge complained under the weight, the rotting timbers shifting. He made it to the other side and motioned for Eliza. She urged her horse forward. The animal was nervous, its ears flat. She was halfway across when the sound came. A rifle shot, echoing up the ravine. The bullet splintered the railing 2 inches from her hand. "Get off the horse!" Ashki roared. 3 men on horseback burst from the cottonwood trees on the far bank. They were the same kind of thugs who had stolen her trunk. They blocked the end of the bridge, trapping her. "Going somewhere, lady," one of them yelled. Natonis, still on the other side, drew his knife and spurred his horse, but he was too far. The men leveled their rifles at Eliza. She was frozen, but the anger from the funeral was still in her. She reached into her saddlebag. Her mother, the practical Boston doctor, had insisted. "The West is not a parlor game," she had said, forcing the small, pearl-handled revolver into Eliza's hand. Eliza pulled it out. Her hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She aimed at the sky and pulled the trigger. The small pop was ridiculous compared to their rifles. A firecracker in a thunderstorm. The men laughed. "Look at that, she's got a toy." The man in the lead spurred his horse onto the bridge. Ashki was already moving. He uncoiled his rope. He was not aiming for the man. He was aiming for the bridge. He threw the loop. It settled over a rotten support post right next to the man's horse. Ashki pulled, his own horse digging into the bank. The post snapped. The bridge shuddered, planks screaming, and the entire section where the man rode collapsed. He and his horse fell 10 feet into the muddy creek bed with a crash. He was screaming, his leg caught under the animal. The other 2 men raised their rifles, but Ashki was on them. He launched his horse from the bank, ignoring the broken bridge, clearing the gap. He knocked one man from his saddle with the sheer force of his horse's shoulder. Natonis, having crossed the river downstream, came up behind the 3rd man and pulled him clean from his horse. The fight was over in 10 seconds. It was not a fight. It was a removal. The men, terrified and soaked, scrambled away into the darkness, leaving their horses. The man with the broken leg dragged himself into the bushes, whimpering. Eliza was shaking, the smell of gunpowder on her hand. Natonis was retrieving the horses. Ashki was scanning the ravine, his body tense. He dismounted and walked to the satchel one of the men had dropped. It was made of thick, oiled leather, branded into the flap. Stark and clear were 2 letters, S.B. Silas Brandt. Ashki emptied the bag onto the ground. Bullets, a flat bottle of whiskey, a coil of wire, and a heavy, black iron key. Eliza dismounted, her legs unsteady. She picked up the key. It was old, but the letters stamped into the head were clear. R.H. R.H., she whispered, her mind racing. "Royce Hale." Ashki took the key. He gave them the key to the pastor's cabin. He looked at her, his eyes dark. "They were not trying to rob you, schoolteacher. They were sent to get the Bible before we could." They made a cold camp 2 miles up the trail, hidden in a cleft of rock. Natonis took the first watch, disappearing into the boulders. Ashki cared for the horses, his movements economical and precise. Eliza felt useless. She was a woman of words, and the world had suddenly become one of impact and iron. She felt a new, sharp scrape on her forearm from when she had jumped from her horse. She opened her other trunk, the one with her personal effects, to find a linen bandage. Her fingers brushed against the false bottom her mother had installed years ago, a place to hide emergency money. She pressed the small catch. The panel opened. Inside was a thin oilskin packet. She had not looked in it for years. She pulled it out. It contained her mother's medical credentials, a few letters, and another document. Folded small. It was not a Boston paper. It was a birth certificate, issued by a United States Army post in the New Mexico Territory, 1848. She read the lines, her blood turning to ice water. Mother unknown. Father unknown. Race Navajo. She read it again and again. Beneath it was a second paper, adoption papers, filed in Boston, signed by the woman she had called mother her entire life. The world stopped. Her hands, her hair, her stubborn jaw. She was not a heart. She did not know what she was. Her mother, her sainted mother who preached honesty and fairness, had built her life on a profound lie. To protect her, the words echoed in her memory, her mother explaining why they did not talk about her origins. It is a cruel world. Eliza, I will be your shield. She looked up. Ashki was watching her, his face unreadable in the moonlight. He was Navajo. Her father was Navajo. She was overcome with a wave of shame so deep it made her dizzy. Who was she? Was she the white teacher, come to save the heathens who Blevins had scorned, or was she one of them, a fraud pretending to be white? She felt cut loose, an anchorless boat in a dark, cold sea. She was terrified. If the white world knew, they would despise her. If Ashki knew, would he see her as a pathetic liar? She folded the paper, her hands shaking, and hid it deep in her trunk. She said nothing. The next morning, they rode to Adani's camp. Ashki insisted, "We need wisdom, and we need to know the law we are fighting for." Grandmother Adani sat by her small fire, her hands never still, weaving. She looked at Eliza, her eyes seeing far more than Eliza was comfortable with. Ashki showed her the key. "Hails," he said. Adani nodded. "They are afraid. This is good." "What is this deed?" Eliza asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "What does it truly say?" "It is a promise," Adani said, looking at the distant mountains. "Pastor Davies was a man who listened. He wrote down the words spoken by my husband and the other elders. He mapped the land. He mapped the winter warm water. He wrote that this water was given to the people of this land, forever, by treaty. He signed it as a witness of his God. My husband signed it with his mark, as a witness of the earth." She looked directly at Eliza. "This is the law. Child. Not Hale's guns, not Brant's money, the paper. If you find that paper, Silas Brant is not a pioneer. He is a thief. Captain Hale is not a soldier. He is a conspirator to a crime against the United States government and my people." The stakes were suddenly terribly clear. It was not just land, it was the law itself. As they rode away, Ashki suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. He pointed to a high, distant butte, a black shape against the morning sun. A single glint of light flashed, sharp as a needle. "A spyglass," Ashki said. "We are being watched." Miles away, the one-eyed man, Doyle, lowered his glass. He had seen them. The scout, the woman, and the boy. He had seen them leave the old woman's camp. They were going for the mountain. He spurred his horse, riding hard for Dusty Mesa. He found Brant in the saloon, eating breakfast. "They're on the move," Doyle said, his one eye watering in the wind. "They're going for the cabin." Brant did not stop eating. Hale's men were incompetent fools. He laid a stack of gold coins on the table. "You are not incompetent, are you, Mr. Doyle?" Doyle scooped up the coins. "No, sir." "I want that map," Brant said, cutting his steak. "I want it before the sun sets today, and I want that schoolteacher to have an accident, a permanent one." Doyle smiled. "Before dawn," he said, "or my name is not Doyle." He walked out of the saloon, whistling. They left the high desert and entered the mountains. The air changed. The scent of dust and creosote was replaced by the sharp, clean smell of pine and cold stone. They climbed for hours. Natonis taking the lead, his eyes scanning the ridges. Ashki rode behind Eliza, a silent guardian. The higher they climbed, the more the world fell away, and the more the past rose up to meet Ashki. This was the same kind of terrain, the same treacherous rock and high wind, where he had led the cavalry patrol. He remembered the stillness before the first shot. He remembered the metallic taste of betrayal, realizing the ambush was not for him, but by him, orchestrated by the very man who paid him. Captain Hale. The shame of it was a cold weight in his gut, heavier than the gun on his hip. He was riding toward a paper, but he was really riding toward his own name, trying to reclaim it from the dust. Eliza was quiet, her body rigid with the effort of the climb. Her Boston education had taught her Latin and rhetoric, but it had not taught her this. She watched Ashki. She watched how he read the ground. He was not just looking. He was reading a language she could not speak. "How do you know this is the way?" she asked, her voice thin in the wind. He pointed, not at the trail, but at the sky. "The wind comes from the high pass. It will bring snow by nightfall. The cabin is below the pass, sheltered by the red cliffs. We must beat the storm." He pointed to the ground. "See there?" She saw only rocks. "The moss," he said. "It grows on the north side. The trail stays to the south, where the sun gives purchase. And that," he pointed to a small, displaced stone. "A shod horse, 2 hours ago, moving fast. We are not the only ones coming this way." Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. He was teaching her a new alphabet, an alphabet of survival. She, who had come to teach, was the student. They reached the cabin just as the sky turned a flat, bruised gray, and the first hard pellets of snow began to sting their faces. The cabin was small, built of heavy logs, nestled against an overhang of red rock. The door was not locked. Ashki pushed it open with his foot, his hand on his knife. The room was a chaos of destruction. Someone had been here. Hale's key. The single room was torn apart. A straw mattress was slid open, feathers and dried grass covering the floor. A small shelf of books was swept clean, their pages ripped. A cast-iron stove was kicked onto its side. "They were looking for it," Eliza whispered, her heart sinking. "We are too late." Natonis scouted the perimeter. "The horse is gone," he called from outside. "One rider. He left fast." He did not find it, Ashki said. He was scanning the ruin, his eyes missing nothing. "How do you know?" Eliza asked, touching a ripped page of Genesis. "Because he would have burned the cabin," Ashki said, to hide his search. He knelt, running his hand over the floorboards near the cold hearth. He looked at the heavy stove, kicked over onto the floor. It was an act of rage, but also of concealment. He motioned to Natonis. Together, they heaved the stove back into place. Beneath it, where it had sat, was a single, clean plank. It did not have the years of grime the others did. Ashki used his knife, prying the edge. The board groaned and lifted. Beneath it was a small, hollow space, lined with oilcloth, and inside, pristine, lay a thick leather Bible, its cover the color of a deep blue sky. Eliza knelt, her hands shaking. She lifted it. It was heavy with purpose. She opened the cover. It was not just a Bible. It was a scrapbook, a journal, a refuge. Tucked between the pages of Exodus were letters, notes, and finally, a single large sheet of drafting vellum, folded 4 times. She unfolded it. It was a map, drawn by a careful hand. It showed the valley, the river, and the high mesa, and at the base of the mesa, a cluster of springs, marked in blue ink to Bia, the winter warm water. "This is it," she breathed. At the bottom was the text, written in the pastor's elegant script, confirming the treaty, reserving the water rights for the people, in perpetuity, as long as the grass shall grow. And the signatures, the looping, confident hand of Pastor Alistair Davies. And beneath it, a mark, a strong, clear pictograph of a soaring eagle, the mark of Ashki's grandfather. Beside the signatures, pressed into the paper, was an embossed seal, a set of scales, a lawyer's seal from Santa Fe. This was not just a promise. It was a legal, binding document. Ashki took the map. He did not read the words. He read the lines. He traced the coordinates the pastor had noted in the margins. His body went rigid. "What is it?" Eliza asked. "I know these marks," he whispered. "They are from the Army survey. I led the surveyors. Captain Hale has this map, the official map. This paper proves the Army map is a lie. It proves they know the water is there. It proves they are claiming land that is not theirs." He looked at her, the truth of it dawning. "This does not just save the water, it convicts Hale." A sudden, sharp smell filled the cabin. Not pine, not snow. "Kerosene," Ashki said. He grabbed the map. A torch arced through the open doorway, landing on the spilled straw of the mattress. The dry tinder exploded. In a second, the room was full of smoke. The doorway was a sheet of orange flame. "Doyle," Natonis coughed, drawing his knife. "The window," Eliza cried, moving toward the small opening. "No," Ashki yelled. "He will be waiting." He kicked at the floorboards in the back corner, the ones hidden by the woodpile. "The cellar. Every cabin has one." He found the ring pull and tore the hatch open. A dark, earthy hole opened up. "Go!" he yelled at Eliza. She hesitated. Smoke was searing her lungs. "Natonis, you first." "Go!" Ashki pushed her. She fell into the darkness, landing hard on a packed dirt floor. Natonis dropped in beside her. Ashki came last, pulling the heavy wooden hatch closed just as the floor above them began to roar. They were in total darkness. It smelled of potatoes and damp earth. "He will wait for us to come out," Natonis said, his voice tense. "No," Ashki replied. "He thinks this is a cellar. It is a tunnel." He felt along the wall. The pastor built against the cliff. He dug through. He found the opening, a low tunnel, and they crawled. Eliza coughing, her eyes streaming. They scrambled for 20 yards and came out into the falling snow. 100 feet from the cabin, hidden by a tumble of boulders. The cabin was an inferno, a pillar of fire against the gray snow, and standing in front of it, silhouetted, was a large man with one eye. Doyle. He was holding a rifle, watching the front door, waiting for them to run out. As they watched, something small and brown darted from the woodpile, dragging its leg. A small desert fox. Its foot was caught in an old, rusted rabbit trap, probably set by the pastor. It pulled, whimpering, trying to escape the terrible heat. Doyle saw it. He raised his rifle, bored, aiming to shoot it. "No," Eliza whispered. Before Ashki could stop her, she broke cover. "Hey!" she screamed, running into the clearing. Doyle spun, shocked, raising his rifle at her. Ashki launched himself from the rocks, hitting Doyle at the waist. They went down in the snow, a tangle of limbs. Natonis was on them, knife raised. Doyle, a seasoned brawler, kicked Ashki in the chest and scrambled backward, firing his rifle wild. The shot went high. Eliza did not watch. She ran to the fox. It snapped at her, terrified. "I am trying to help you." She wept, fumbling with the rusted spring of the trap. The metal bit into her cold fingers, but she wrenched it open. The fox, free, vanished into the snow. Doyle was gone. He had seen he was outnumbered and had sprinted for his horse. They heard the hoofbeats fade. Eliza sagged to her knees, her hand bleeding where the trap had cut her. The cabin was collapsing, sending a shower of sparks into the snow. They were alive, and she had the Bible, clutched tight inside her coat, the map safe within it. They found a shallow cave 2 miles down the mountain, a crack in the rock just deep as a horse. Natonis took the first watch, disappearing onto the ridge above them. Invisible. Ashki built a fire, small, hot, and nearly smokeless, using dry juniper. The snow was falling heavily now, a white curtain that hid them from the world. Eliza sat huddled, shaking, the adrenaline fading, leaving her frozen. Her Boston wool was soaked through. Ashki watched her. She was trying to stop her teeth from chattering. He took his heavy wool blanket, the one woven by his grandmother, and put it around her shoulders. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "You will freeze." "I am of this land." He said, "You are not. You will be sick." She shook her head, trying to hand it back. He sighed, a small sound of impatience, and sat down next to her. Close, pulling the blanket around both of them. They sat shoulder to shoulder, a practical, necessary warmth. The heat from his body was steady, solid. It was not a gesture of intimacy, but of survival, a silent, shared agreement. They sat for a long time, watching the small fire. "You saved that fox," he said, not looking at her. "It was a foolish thing to do. He could have shot you." "I could not let it burn," she said, staring into the flames. "There is too much burning in the world." He nodded, understanding. "My people have a word, hos-ho. It means balance, harmony, to walk in beauty. Brant, Hale, they are the world out of balance. They are the fire that burns without reason." He looked at her. "What we are doing, finding this paper, it is hos-ho. It is the work of putting the world right again." Eliza thought of her own past, the lie of her birth, the secret in her trunk. She felt anything but balanced. "My mother, the woman who raised me, she was a doctor. She used to say that justice was not a gift from God. It was a human skill, like setting a bone. It is the work of finding the two broken pieces and holding them together until they heal strong. It requires patience, and it hurts." Ashki considered this. Your mother was a wise woman. They sat in silence, sharing the warmth. The snow stopped before dawn. The world was white and silent. As they were packing the horses, they heard movement. Ashki put his hand on Eliza's arm, pushing her back into the rocks. He and Natonis moved to the mouth of the cave, knives ready. "That is far enough, Ashki." Captain Royce Hale rode into the small clearing, flanked by 2 armed soldiers. He was not aiming his gun. He sat his horse, his hands resting on his saddle horn, his face calm. "A cold night for a fire, Miss Hart," he said, nodding to her. He looked at the smoking remains of their camp. "Doyle is an animal. I apologize for his methods, but he is effective." "What do you want, Captain?" Eliza said, stepping forward, the Bible heavy in her coat. "You have it. Do not you." Hale smiled, a cold, thin expression. "The pastor's lost relic. I will be brief. Give it to me." "It is a legal document," Eliza said, her voice shaking but strong. "It belongs to the people of this valley, and it will be filed with the federal court." Hale laughed. "The court? You are still in Boston, are you not? There is no court here. There is just me, and there is Mr. Brant." He leaned forward. "Give me the paper. It is a curiosity, nothing more. A footnote. In return, I will guarantee your safety. I will see to it that Mr. Brant makes a sizable donation to your school. I will persuade him to leave Mabel Quinn's boarding house in the smithy alone." The threat was clear, wrapped in the language of a favor. "You are threatening them," Eliza said, horrified. "I am offering you a choice, Miss Hart, your friends, or a piece of paper." Ashki stepped forward. "You will not touch them." Hale's gaze shifted to Ashki, and the coldness returned. You are already a traitor. No one will miss you, but her and the deputy. And Mabel, the town is a tinderbox. Accidents happen." Eliza clutched the Bible. She looked at Ashki, at Hale, at the soldiers. She thought of Mabel's kindness, of Ruth's tired courage. "The law is not for sale, Captain," she said. Hale sighed. "A poor choice. A very poor choice." He looked at Ashki, his smile returning. "You should have died in that canyon. Scout. You will wish you had." He wheeled his horse. "Enjoy the walk back to town. I believe you will find things have changed." The soldiers turned and followed him, their horses crunching in the fresh snow. "He just let us go," Eliza said, confused. "Why?" "He did not let us go," Ashki said, his face grim. He was strapping the pack onto his horse. "He thinks he has already won." They rode hard, down the mountain, the rising sun at their backs. They reached the last high overlook, the one that showed the whole valley, just as the sun cleared the eastern rim. Eliza gasped. Far below, in the gray morning light, a crew of 50 men was working. They looked like ants. They were laying a temporary spur line, the raw-cut ties and new steel rails gleaming. The line snaked away from the main railroad survey, heading directly across the desert floor, a steel finger pointing straight at the one patch of green in the entire valley. "Straight toward Tabiyah." "He is not waiting for the law," Eliza whispered in horror. "He is not trying to buy the water." "He is stealing it," Ashki said, "and he is stealing it today." They rode back into Dusty Mesa, the sun on their backs, the sight of the steel snake in the valley floor burning in their minds. The town felt different. The air was taut, like a bowstring pulled back. The sound of hammers from the spur line was a constant, metallic heartbeat, a sound of theft. Eliza Hart went straight to the schoolhouse. It was still a shell, but it was her shell. In the dust beside the broken door lay the heavy, bronze bell that had fallen from the steeple years ago. She had a new purpose. She found Miguel at his forge, his face grim as he listened to the distant hammering. "Miguel," she said, her voice clear and hard. "I need this." He looked at the bell, then at the rail line far across the desert, and he understood. He nodded once. He and Natonis fetched a block and tackle. It took an hour of sweat and careful leverage, but they hoisted the heavy bell back into its rickety steeple, securing it with new iron bolts. That afternoon, just as the sun began to bleed into the western hills, Eliza Hart pulled the rope. The sound was shocking. It was not the thin, reedy call of the church bell. This was a deep, bronze clang, a sound of iron and purpose. It cut through the hammering. It cut through the saloon music. It was the sound of school, the sound of a beginning. People gathered. They came from the general store, from the livery, from their dusty homes. Miners, ranchers with hollowed-out faces, Mabel and Deputy Ruth. On the saloon porch, Brant's men, including the one-eyed Doyle, stopped their card game to watch. Ashki stood on the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his presence a silent challenge. Eliza stood on the schoolhouse steps, her hand still on the rope. She held the blue-covered Bible in her other hand. "When I came here, I was told this building was a ruin," she announced, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I was told this town was lawless. They were wrong. We went looking for a pastor's book. We found the law." She held up the vellum map. It snapped in the evening breeze. "This is the winter water deed," she cried. "It is a legal treaty, signed by Pastor Davies and the Navajo elders and sealed by the Santa Fe court. It states that the winter warm water belongs to all the people of this valley, not to the railroad, not to one man." A wave of murmurs, of disbelief and sudden, fierce hope washed through the crowd. "That is a scrap of paper," Doyle yelled from the porch, his voice laced with contempt. "It is the law," Ruth Calder shouted back. She stepped forward, her badge catching the last light of the sun. "And until the federal marshal arrives, my office will uphold it." Eliza stepped down and nailed a new piece of paper to the schoolhouse door. "This is the Dusty Mesa Water Charter," she said. "A temporary plan, based on the deed, for sharing the public well. 1 barrel per family, 2 for those with livestock, No exceptions. Mr. Brant does not own the water. We do. Brant's men laughed, but the gaunt-faced ranchers and the thirsty miners did not. They looked at each other. Then, one by one, they began to form a line at the well. It was the first time they had seen justice. The victory lasted one night. The next morning, a cry of fury and despair went up. The small irrigation ditch, the one that fed the town's few vegetable gardens and watered the horses at the livery, was dry. The head gate, 2 miles up, had been smashed with sledgehammers. The earth dam was torn apart. It was a vicious, pointless act of destruction. On the muddy bank, drawn with a stick, was a crude, mocking symbol of a coyote. Captain Royce Hale rode through the main street, his horse prancing. "This is what happens," he announced, his voice loud with false regret. "Navajo saboteurs. They are angry about the railroad. They are lashing out." Fear, cold and immediate, replaced the hope of the night before. The town began to turn on itself. Men who had stood in line together at the well now looked at each other with suspicion. The alliance was breaking. Eliza saw the symbol. It was wrong. A mockery of the drawings she had seen in Adani's camp. This was Brant's work. This was Hale's lie. She went to her room at Mabel's boarding house. She looked in the small, cracked mirror. She saw her dark hair, her high cheekbones. She saw the lie she had lived. She pulled the oilskin packet from her trunk. She unfolded the birth certificate. Father Navajo. Hale's accusation felt like it was aimed directly at her. She was the saboteur. She was the fraud. A wave of shame washed over her. She wanted to tear the paper to shreds, to run back to Boston, to the world where she understood the rules. She straightened, her jaw set. No, her mother had lied to protect her, but her mother had also sent her here. Teach them fairness. She looked at her own face, at the face she had never understood. She would not choose. She would be both. She would be the woman who could read the white man's law and the woman who understood the language of the earth. She put the certificate back, not in the false bottom, but with her mother's letters. The town was now desperate. The well was low. The ditch was dry. Brant had created the very crisis he had pretended to solve. Mabel Quinn hung a new sign outside her boarding house. "Soup free!" She turned her dining room into a kitchen, a refuge. "If he wants to starve us out, he will find we have deep pantries," she said, stirring a massive pot. The boarding house became the headquarters for the resistance. Miguel went to work. He did not shoe horses. He stoked his forge until it roared, the heat visible in the air. He worked hour after hour. He was not making guns. He was making railroad spikes. But he was heating them, pulling them from the fire, and with 2 powerful blows, bending them at a sharp angle before plunging them into the quenching tub. They were useless for laying track. They were perfect for unlaying it. Ruth Calder gathered 3 men she trusted, a rancher who had lost his herd, the general store shopkeep, and Miguel. She laid 5 rifles on a table. "We are not starting a war," she said, her voice low and steady. "We are holding a well. This is defense, not violence. You do not fire unless fired upon. You stand, that is all. You just stand." That night, Ashki came to Eliza on the porch. He had seen the shadow in her eyes, the fight with herself. "You must come," he said. He led her on foot, away from the town, to Adani's camp. The new moon was a fingernail of ice in the black sky. The people were gathered, their faces worried. The sound of the railroad hammers a distant threat. Adani was burning sage, the smoke rising in a thin, clean line. She was chanting, a song for harmony, for Hozho, for a world out of balance. She saw Eliza and beckoned her forward. She placed a hand on Eliza's head, her palm dry and warm. "You have your mother's heart," Adani said, her voice clear. "And your father's blood. You are not 2 pieces. You are one. The water knows you." She touched Eliza's forehead with wet, red clay. We will call you Tlove to Yanultehi, she who brings water. Eliza did not weep. She felt the broken pieces inside her. The Boston scholar and the desert orphan finally join. It was not a baptism. It was a homecoming. They returned to Mabel's soup kitchen. The room was full of quiet, desperate people. "We have the deed," Eliza said, her voice new, solid. "But it is just paper. We need to stop those engines. We need to prove Hale and Brandt are partners in this theft." "They are meeting at the fort tonight," Ruth said, coming in. "My source says they are celebrating their new spur line." "Brandt's office," Ashki said. "It is in the new railroad car on the siding. He keeps his ledgers there." It was reckless. It was necessary. At midnight, Ashki and Eliza moved through the alleys. The town was dark, patrolled by Hale's men. The railroad siding was quiet. A single railroad car, painted a rich, dark green, stood alone. One Pinkerton guard sat on the steps, tilted back in a chair, his hat over his eyes. Ashki was a shadow. He moved behind the car, Eliza following, her heart in her throat. He slid a knife between the door and the frame. There was a quiet click. The lock was simple. He slid the door open 6 inches. Eliza slipped inside. Ashki followed, pulling the door almost closed. The car smelled of cigar smoke and leather. She lit one small lamp, shielding the flame with her hand. The office was plush, a thick carpet, a mahogany desk, a large map of the territory, with a spur line to Tubia drawn in bold red ink, and on the desk, a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Eliza opened it. Her hands were steady. Names, dates, payments. To R.C. for clearing the survey patrol. To P. Blevins for community relations. For ditching services. Ashki, she whispered. Tucked in the back was a folded letter. It was on official Army stationery. It guaranteed full military protection for Silas Brandt's cruise at Tubia, citing no valid prior claims to the land. It was signed by Captain Royce Hale himself, a bold, arrogant script. "This is it," she said. "This is the conspiracy. This is the proof." She took the letter and the single ledger page. They slipped out, the guard still snoring. They returned to Mabel's, the evidence clutched in Eliza's hand. The victory was sharp, clean, but the night was not over. The next morning, Eliza went to the schoolhouse. It was quiet, too quiet. "A little star," she called. She had found the child 3 days before, a small Navajo orphan whose parents had died of the fever, sleeping in the livery. The girl was bright, quick, and had not spoken a word. Eliza had been bringing her food, sitting with her, teaching her the alphabet on a small slate. The schoolhouse was empty. The small slate Eliza had given her was on the floor, snapped in two. Eliza ran, her chest tight with a fear she had never known. She ran to the public well. The men Ruth had posted were there, their rifles held steady. And stuck in the wooden frame above the well, flapping in the wind, was a Pinkerton flag. Tied to the crank handle, swinging in the breeze, was a small, carved wooden bird. The toy Ashki had made for Little Star 2 days before. Eliza looked across the street, on the saloon porch. Doyle was sitting, cleaning his fingernails with a long, sharp knife. He looked up, saw her, and smiled. That afternoon, Brandt and Hale rode to the center of town. They sat their horses, emblems of power. "Citizens of Dusty Mesa," Brandt announced, his voice booming. "Due to the ongoing sabotage by hostile natives, and to ensure the timely arrival of progress, I am advancing our schedule. The groundbreaking ceremony for the new water station will be in 3 days. The United States Army will secure the site." Hale spoke next, his voice cold and flat. "A state of emergency exists, effective immediately. A curfew is in place from sundown to sunrise. Any persons found on the street will be detained. This is for your protection." The trap was set. The bowstring was pulled tight. 3 days. The law was in their hands, but the child and the water were in Brant's. The game was no longer about paper. It was about blood. The curfew was a fist, closing on the town. Hale's patrols, 4 men deep, walked the main street, their boot heels clicking with arrogance. The hammering on the spur line had not stopped. They worked under large arc lamps, a pool of harsh white light in the desert, an unnatural sun. Inside Mabel's kitchen, the air was thick with the smell of stew and fear. "They will run a test engine over that line before dawn," Miguel said, his voice low. He held up one of his creations, a railroad spike, heated and bent at a sharp, 45-degree angle, a metal claw. "This will not stop the train, but it will make it jump. It will make it slow." "It is too dangerous," Eliza said, looking at the ledger page and Hale's letter, safe on the table. "This is the proof. We should wait for the marshal." "The marshal will arrive to find a new water station and a dry valley." Ashki said. He was checking his knife. "There is no waiting. We stop the rails, and we get the girl. Tonight." "We cannot do both," Ruth argued, loading her rifle. "They have her, but we do not know where. The rail line is the only target we can hit." A terrible choice hung in the air, the paper, the water, the child. "We split," Ashki said. "I will find her." "No," Eliza said, a sudden, fierce authority in her voice. "You cannot. That is what Doyle wants. He is baiting you. You are the symbol, Ashki. If he kills you, he breaks the alliance." She looked at the faces in the room. "The target is the rail line. We delay Brant. We buy time. That is the only logical choice." Ashki looked at her, his eyes unreadable. She was right. It was a cold, brutal calculation. He hated her for it, and he respected her. He nodded. "Once. Natonis, Miguel, Ruth. We go for the line. Eliza, you and Mabel, guard this." He pointed to the papers on the table. "Guard it with your life." They moved out just after midnight, 4 shadows melting into the deeper shadows of the alleys. They carried 20 of Miguel's bent spikes, heavy and cold. They moved like ghosts, using the arroyos, circling wide of the arc lights, coming up on the spur line a mile from the main track, at a sharp, unguarded curve. The work was fast, brutal, and almost silent. Miguel used a heavy, cloth-wrapped mallet to knock the existing spikes loose. Ashki and Natonis pulled them, their muscles straining. Ruth stood guard, her rifle sweeping the darkness. They replaced the spikes, one by one, hammering the bent claws into the ties on the outside of the rail. The steel would guide the wheel flange up and over, not hold it in. They were working on the 8th spike when the first shot came. It was not a rifle. It was a pistol, fired from 20 yards away. The bullet ricocheted off the rail with a high-pitched zang. "Ambush!" Ruth yelled, dropping to one knee and firing into the darkness. Doyle. He had been waiting for them. 3 men with him, firing from a shallow ditch. Natonis cried out, a sharp intake of breath. He clutched his left arm, his sleeve suddenly dark. "I am hit!" Ashki pulled him behind a stack of rail ties. Miguel raised his mallet, a useless weapon. A second volley of shots kicked up dust around their feet. "They have us pinned!" Ruth yelled. She could see the muzzle flashes. They were trapped. One of the Pinkertons had a signal lantern, and he raised it, trying to get a better view of them. Ruth raised her rifle, took a steadying breath, and fired. She was not aiming for a man. She was aiming for the light. The shot rang out. The lantern exploded in a shower of glass and burning oil. The world was plunged into absolute, blinding darkness. "Now!" Ashki yelled. "Back to the arroyo!" He half-carried Natonis, and they ran, scrambling into the darkness as Doyle's men fired blindly, their curses filling the night. While Ashki and his team were pinned down at the rail line, a different kind of betrayal was happening in town. Doyle had planned his night in 2 parts. He knew the fighters would go for the track. He, meanwhile, went for the prize. He walked to the miners' camp, where a gaunt man named Peters was sitting, coughing. "You took the lady's soup," Doyle said. I was hungry," Peters whispered, terrified. "And you took my silver dollar," Doyle said, his one eye seeming to glow. "Time to earn it. Where does she keep the paper?" Peters, trapped between poverty and fear, broke. "The schoolhouse," he whimpered. "She fixed a board under the woodpile. She thinks it is clever." Doyle smiled. He and two of his men, Pinkertons with heavy coats, walked to the schoolhouse. It was dark, empty. He kicked the door open. He strode to the woodpile and kicked it aside. He found the loose board. "Clever," he sneered. He reached in and pulled out the blue-covered Bible. He carried it to the saloon, which was empty save for the bartender. He opened it. He pulled out the vellum map. He unfolded it on the bar, admiring the pastor's careful lines. "Beautiful," he said. He looked at the legal text. "All this trouble. For ink." He looked up at one of his men. "Brant does not need the whole thing. He just needs to cloud the title. Give him half to bargain with." He took the map, a priceless, irreplaceable document, and tore it in two. The sound of ripping vellum was quiet, obscene. "You," he said to his man, "ride to the Red Cliff cabin. Now, Hale will be there. Give him this. Tell him I have the other half, and I have the girl. The deal is set. Tomorrow night, Brant gets his water." He handed the man the bottom half of the map, the one with the signatures and the seal. The man tucked it into his coat and ran for his horse. Doyle folded the top half, the one showing the springs, and put it in his own breast pocket. He threw the empty blue Bible into the corner. Eliza and Mabel heard the shots from the rail line. They were at the boarding house, the ledger page and Hale's letter hidden beneath the floor of the kitchen. "They are in trouble," Eliza said, her face pale. She grabbed a lantern. "You will not go," Mabel commanded. "Your job is here, to guard the proof." Just then, Ashki and the others burst through the back door. Natonis was bleeding, leaning on Miguel. "They were waiting," Ruth said, her face black with soot and rage. "Natonis," Eliza gasped, running for her medical kit. Her mother had taught her to set bones and stitch wounds. "Get him on the table." As she was cleaning the wound, a minor tear through the muscle of his forearm, Ashki watched her. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Doyle," he said. He knew. He looked at Eliza. "Where's the Bible?" "At the schoolhouse," she said, her hands shaking as she tied the bandage. "It is safer." His eyes went wide. "He set us up. He was not at the ambush. He sent the ambush. He was after the map. He ran. He did not use the door. He smashed through the kitchen window and ran, sprinting down the dark street. Eliza, her heart frozen with a terrible, dawning horror, ran after him. They reached the schoolhouse. The door was open. The woodpile was scattered. The floorboard was tossed aside. The hole was empty. Ashki stood in the ruined room, his chest heaving. He had failed. He had chosen the rails, and he had lost the water. "He has it," Eliza whispered. "Oh, God, he has it all. He has the map. He has Little Star. He won." Ashki's rage was a cold, pure thing. He drew his knife. "Not yet. I am going for him. I will find that girl, and I will cut that map from his chest." "No." Eliza grabbed his arm. "Ashki, stop. This is what he wants. He wants you to come, alone, blind with rage. He will kill you. That is his entire plan." "Let him try," Ashki roared, his voice breaking. "Your law is gone. Your proof is gone. All that is left is this." He held up the knife. "No!" she screamed back, tears of her own frustration and anger streaming down her face. "Our proof is not gone. We still have the ledger. We have Hale's letter. We can still prove the conspiracy. If you die, we have nothing. We have no one to stand with us. We lose." The force of their argument held them. Two magnets repelling, the warrior's code versus the lawyer's, blood versus ink. "And what about the girl?" he whispered, his voice raw. "What is your ledger worth if that child is—" He could not say it. A low moan filled the air. It was not human. It was the wind, a deep, rising howl from the west. The air, which had been still and cold, suddenly turned warm, suffocating. The dust began to rise. Ashki looked out the window. A storm, a big one. The wind hit the town like a solid wall, a sandstorm, birthed in the dry plains, slamming into dusty mesa. The air turned brown. Visibility dropped to 5 feet. Sand and grit blasted against the building. A high-pitched scream. "Nature is angry," Ashki said. The storm was chaos. Brant's men on the spur line were blinded, their arc lamps swaying wildly before shattering. The town was plunged into a nightmare of wind and darkness. Mabel Quinn fought her way from the boarding house, a rope tied around her waist. She felt her way to the schoolhouse, finding Eliza and Ashki huddled inside. "The town is panicking," she yelled over the wind. "They are running blind. We have to get them to shelter." She looked up at the bell rope. She grabbed it. She began to pull. A steady, rhythmic clang, clang, clang. The sound of the bell was a lifeline in the roaring dark. It was a guide. "The church!" Mabel roared at the door. "Get to the church! The stone will hold!" Through the storm, people heard it. They crawled, clinging to each other, following the sound of the bell to the only stone building in town. Mabel saved them, pulling them in one by one. In the schoolhouse, Eliza, clinging to the doorframe, saw something, a piece of white paper, tumbling in the brown air, snagged on a broken splinter of the door. She grabbed it. It was vellum. It was ripped. It was the top half of the map, the part showing to Bia. Doyle's man must have lost it in the first blast of wind. She pulled it inside, her heart pounding. "Ashki, half of it, I have half." She ran to her trunk, which she had moved to the schoolhouse. She pulled out a thick book, the complete works of William Shakespeare. She grabbed her sewing kit. Her hands were raw and shaking, but she threaded the needle. She opened the heavy book. She laid the vellum scrap flat against the inside of the thick leather spine, and she began to sew, her stitches small and tight, binding the map to the book. She was stitching the law of the land into the laws of literature, letters, protecting life. The storm raged. Ashki grabbed Eliza's arm. "We go." "Go where?" she yelled. "We follow the wind," he said. Doyle's man rode for the red cliff. The storm is from the west. He is riding straight into it. We can track him. He turned to Mabel, who was still ringing the bell. "Bar the door when they are all in. Do not open it." Mabel nodded, her face grim. Ashki and Eliza, with Natonis, his arm bandaged, plunged into the storm. They were no longer running from it. They were using it. It was their cover. It was their ally. They found the Pinkerton a mile out of town, his horse frantic, turned away from the wind, blinded. Natonis, despite his wound, pulled the man from the saddle. "Where is Doyle?" Ashki's knife was at the man's throat. I do not know," the man shrieked, sand filling his mouth. "Where is the meeting?" Ashki pressed. "The Red Cliff Cabin," the man screamed. "Hale's old hunting cabin. Tomorrow night, Brant and Hale. They are signing the papers. Doyle is bringing the girl. He is bringing the other half of the map. Please, let me go." Ashki and Natonis left him, weaponless, to the mercy of the storm. They fought their way back to the high rocks above the town, to Adani's camp. The old woman was sitting by her fire, somehow sheltered, the wind screaming over her head. Ashki knelt. He told her everything. The map, torn, the girl, taken, the rendezvous at the Red Cliff. Adani looked into the fire. "This is the breaking point. The world is out of balance. It must be set right." Ashki stood. He looked at the storm, at the valley, at the woman who was his only true elder. "I will bring Little Star home," he vowed, his hand on the stone, "and I will keep the water." He left her and went to the church. The wind was deafening. He found Eliza inside, her face covered in grit, tending to Natonis. The townsfolk were huddled, praying. He did not need to speak. She saw his face. The decision was made. The debate was over. Logic and rage were now one. She stood up. She put her hand on his shoulder, her fingers digging in, a promise of steel. "I am coming with you." The wind did not howl. It was a solid thing, a presence that pressed against the stone walls of the small church, seeking entry. It was a sound of pure, colorless rage, the sound of a world being scoured clean. Inside, the townspeople of Dusty Mesa were huddled in the pews, their faces pale in the flickering light of 2 lanterns. The church was an island of stone in a sea of brown, churning chaos. Mabel Quinn, her face a mask of exhaustion, had finally barred the heavy oak door. The sound of the school bell was long gone, swallowed by the storm. In a small vestry, Eliza was finishing the bandage on Natonis's arm. The wound was clean, the bullet having passed through the muscle without hitting bone. He was lucky. He sat, stoic, his young face tight with a pain that was more than physical. Miguel and Ruth stood guard at the door, their rifles held at the ready, though they all knew the storm was a better guard than any gun. Ashki was not with them. He was standing at the chancel window, a tall, narrow slit of glass, staring out into the opaque, roaring darkness. He was not looking at the storm. He was looking through it, toward the red cliff. Eliza finished her knot. She stood, her body aching with a weariness so deep it felt like it was in her bones. The last 24 hours had been a lifetime. The race down the mountain, the confrontation at the well, the betrayal at the schoolhouse, the ambush at the tracks, and now this, a world gone mad. She walked to him, standing beside him at the window. The glass was vibrating, cold to the touch. "You cannot see anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the din. "I do not need to see," he said. "They are there. Hale, Brant, Doyle. The storm traps them, just as it traps us." "Then we wait," she said. "We have the letter. We have the ledger page. We have half the map. We are safe here. When the storm passes, we can—" "No," he said, turning to face her. His eyes were dark, the pupils wide. "The storm is our only chance. When it breaks, they will have their meeting. They will sign their papers. They will have the girl. The storm is our cover. We leave now." "Leave!" She was stunned. "Into that we would be blind in 1 minute. We would be lost." "I am never lost here," he said. "There is a cabin, a small line shack I use. It is a mile north, tucked into the lee of the rocks. It is solid. We can stage there, wait for the first break in the wind, and move on the cliff." He looked past her, at Miguel and Ruth. "We all go." Ruth shook her head. "We cannot look at them." She motioned to the pews, filled with frightened families, the old and the young. "We cannot leave them. If one of Brant's men found this place, our job is here, to hold this ground, to protect them." Mabel nodded, stepping forward. "She is right. You 3 go." She looked at Natonis, then at Eliza. "No, not her." "I am going," Eliza said. The words were out of her mouth before she had time to think them. They were a simple, hard fact. "You are a schoolteacher," Mabel said, her voice rough with affection. "You are not a fighter." "I am, now," Eliza said. She thought of the vellum sewn into the spine of her Shakespeare, safe in her satchel. "That map is my word. That girl, Little Star. She is my responsibility. I am going." Ashki looked at her, a long, appraising look. He was weighing her, not her words, but her substance. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw. He nodded. "Once. Natonis, you stay. Your arm is weak. You, Miguel, and Ruth will hold this church. If we are not back by sunrise tomorrow, burn the ledger page. Get it to the marshal. Do not let them find it. It was a last command. He was preparing to die. He and Eliza moved to the heavy, barred door. Ashki put his shoulder to it, fighting the wind. He slid the bar back. The door flew open, torn from his grasp, slamming against the stone wall. The storm entered the church, a solid force of sand and ice, extinguishing the lanterns, plunging the room into screaming darkness. For a moment, there was only the wind. Then Ashki grabbed Eliza's hand, his grip like iron. "Now," he yelled. They plunged out into the brown, roaring void. The next hour was not a walk. It was a fight. The wind was a physical enemy, a giant hand that tried to tear them from the earth. The air was not air, it was a liquid, churning mass of sand and grit. It scoured their faces, filled their mouths, blinded them. Eliza had wrapped a scarf around her face, but it was useless. She could not see. She could not breathe. The world was gone. There was only the roar and the iron grip of Ashki's hand on hers. He was her anchor. He was the only solid thing in a world that had come apart. He did not walk. He leaned, his body at an impossible angle, pulling her forward. He moved from memory, his feet knowing the ground he could not see. He found the shallow arroyo, pulling her down into it, the dip in the land offering a tiny respite from the main force of the wind. They stumbled, fell, and rose again. He was relentless, a single, moving point of purpose in the chaos. Eliza's lungs burned. Her legs were numb. She had never known such total, deafening, blinding force. She was terrified. She was beyond terror. She was just a body, moving because the hand that held hers was moving. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The roar was still there, a monster overhead, but the physical assault lessened. He pulled her forward, and she stumbled against a solid wall, a log. He had found it, a tiny, one-room shack, built of railroad ties and hope, pressed so tightly against a sheer rock face that the wind screamed over it, leaving a small pocket of stillness. He found the door, kicked it open, and shoved her inside. He followed, and slammed the door against the storm. Silence. The silence was as shocking as the noise. It was not a true silence. The wind was a dull, distant roar, the sound of a faraway ocean. But the cabin was still. It was pitch black. Eliza sagged against the wall, her lungs heaving, her body shaking so violently she could barely stand. She was alive. She was out of the storm. She heard a scratch, a spark. A small flame bloomed. Ashki was lighting the kindling in a small, pot-bellied stove in the corner. The dry wood caught, and a dim, orange light filled the tiny space. It was not much bigger than a large closet. A narrow bunk was built against one wall, a small table and 2 stools, a single window, covered by a heavy wooden shutter. It was his. It smelled of him sage, leather, and something metallic, like old iron. He did not look at her. He moved to the door. He was checking the latch. It was small. Iron. He turned, looking for something. He found it, a heavy wooden beam, resting on 2 pegs. He lifted the beam, his muscles flexing in the firelight, and dropped it into 2 thick iron brackets on either side of the door. The sound of the bar dropping was a heavy, final thud. It was a sound of absolute finality. The storm was barred. The world was barred. Doyle, Hale, Brandt, they were all on the other side of that wood. It was just the 2 of them, in the small, warm, breathing darkness. Eliza was still shaking. The adrenaline was draining, leaving a cold, vast lake of fear. She stared at the barred door, at the man who had barred it. He was a warrior. He had just locked them in, or locked the world out. We are going to die tomorrow, are we not? she whispered. It was not a question. It was a statement, the logical conclusion of all their choices. Ashki turned from the door. The firelight carved shadows under his high cheekbones, made his eyes deep and unreadable. He looked at her, this woman, caked in dust, her hair wild, her clothes torn, this schoolteacher from Boston. He saw her terror. It was a raw, naked thing, stripped bare by the storm. He did not speak. He walked to her. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace he always had. He stopped in front of her. He raised his hands. Eliza flinched. She thought he might shake her, or strike her, or she did not know. His hands were steady. He did not grab her. He placed them, palms flat, on her waist, his fingers curling to find the solid, living bone of her hips. It was not a violation. It was an anchor. It was a gesture of pure, simple possession, but not of her body. It was a possession of the moment. His hands said, "You are here. I am here. We are real. The world is outside, but we are in this place. Be still." The shaking, which had been in her bones, stopped. It simply stopped. His hands were a dam against her fear. She looked up into his face. His expression was soft, something she had never seen. She did not pull away. She did not move. Her own hands, raw and cold, came up and rested on his forearms, her fingers gripping the hard muscle. It was her own anchor. It was consent. It was an answer. "I am afraid," she whispered, her voice breaking, "and I am a fraud." He just watched her, his hands firm on her waist. "The day of the funeral," she said, the words spilling out, the secret she had held so tightly. "I found my papers, my mother, the woman who raised me. She adopted me. My birth certificate. From an army post, my father, it says, unknown, race Navajo." She let out a shuddering breath. "I came here to teach, to help your people, and I am one of you, and I am one of them. I am nothing. I am a lie. Ashki, I am a white woman with a secret, and I am a Navajo who does not know a single word." He listened. He did not flinch. He let the silence after her words stretch, fill the small cabin. The fire crackled, a small, stubborn sound. The wind moaned, a distant grief. His hands tightened, just slightly, pulling her a fraction of an inch closer. "The name the world gives you does not matter," he said, his voice low, rough. "The name you choose, that is who you are." He raised one hand, his calloused thumb coming up to her face. He did not touch her skin. He touched the faint, dried, red clay mark on her forehead, the one Adani had given her. "She who brings water," he said. "That is your name. It is the one you earned." He looked at her, this impossible, brave, and foolish woman, this virgin in his cabin. He had been a man adrift, a scout without a tribe, a warrior without a war. He had been fighting for a ghost, for his lost honor. Now, he knew, he was not fighting for the past. He was fighting for the future. He was fighting for this woman, for the child she wanted to save, for the world she wanted to build. In that moment, he chose her. It was not a choice of passion. It was a choice of life. He chose her over his ghosts, over his anger, over his solitude. He chose her forever. The heat from his hands was a comfort, a promise. The small cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a new world. The sound of the stove was a hearth fire. The roar of the wind was the sound of the old world dying, making way. He released her, stepping back. The moment passed, but it left the air changed. The tension was gone, replaced by a solid, quiet purpose. He reached into the small leather pouch at his belt. He pulled out a thin, dark braid of sweetgrass, tightly woven. "My grandmother made this," he said. "It is for binding, for strength, so you will not be afraid." He pressed it into her hand. It smelled of the earth, sweet and dry. Eliza looked at the gift, her throat tight. She understood. It was an exchange. She reached into the satchel at her feet, the one that held her life. She had no sweetgrass. She had no totems. She had only her mother's tools. She pulled out the heavy, black fountain pen, its nib gold. "This was my mother's," she said, her voice steady. "The one who raised me. It is for writing, for making the truth solid." She held it out to him. "For the words." He took it. The metal object was strange in his hand, cold and heavy. He looked at it, then at her. He nodded. He understood. He slid it carefully into his own pouch. "After this," Eliza said, her voice quiet but fierce, "when we get her back, we will build the school. By the warm springs. We will build it together. If we are alive." Ashki said it was not a question of doubt. It was a statement of fact. "We will be," she replied. "We have to be." They did not sleep. They sat, not on the bunk, but on the floor, their backs against the solid log wall. He shared his blanket with her again, pulling it over both their shoulders. But this time it was not for survival. It was a choice, a partnership. Eliza pulled the heavy copy of Shakespeare from her satchel. She did not open it to read the words. She opened it to the inside cover, where the top half of the vellum map was stitched, safe and hidden, against the leather spine. In the dim, flickering light of the stove, they looked at it, the lines of the map, the faint words of the play peeking out from behind it. His land, her words, her law, his world, stitched together. This was not a soft thing. This was a moral engine. This was the reason for the fight. They sat for hours, the storm slowly, painfully, spending its rage. The shriek of the wind dropped to a low, guttural moan. Then, a change. A sliver of watery, gray light forced its way through a crack in the wooden shutter. The moon, the storm had broken. They looked at each other. It was time. They stood as one. They checked their weapons. His knife, sharp and ready. Her small, pearl-handled revolver. It felt heavier now. He went to the door and, with a quiet scrape of wood on iron, lifted the heavy bar. The sound was a declaration. He opened the door. The air was cold, scoured clean, and sharp as glass. The ground was covered in a film of ice and sand. The moon was a fractured thing, seen through fast-moving clouds. He stepped out, and she followed. They stood for a moment, breathing the new, cold air. Far in the distance, high on the dark silhouette of the red cliff, a single fire burned, a signal, a small, defiant spark. They had gathered. The meeting was on. The air was scoured clean. The storm had passed, leaving the world sharp and cold, the ground a frozen crust of sand over mud. Above, the clouds were tearing apart, showing a chipped, bone-white moon. The fire on the red cliff was a single, defiant eye, a beacon of arrogance. Ashki moved first, Eliza at his side. They did not speak. The time for words, for comfort, for doubt, was over. There was only the objective. They were halfway to the cliff's base, moving through the shattered, debris-strewn arroyo, when they saw the others, a small, dark group emerging from the shadow of a wash. It was Ruth, her rifle held low, Miguel carrying his heavy, cloth-wrapped mallet, Mabel, her face set like stone, and Natonis, his wounded arm bound tight, a long knife in his good hand. "You should have waited," Ashki said, his voice flat. "We did," Ruth replied. "The church is secure. Pastor Blevins is leading prayers. We are the answer." Miguel pointed to the small, stubborn mule he was leading. In the cart behind it, tied down, was the heavy, bronze school bell. "You brought the bell," Eliza whispered, astonished. "You said you wanted a court," Mabel said, her voice a low rumble. "You cannot have a court without a bell to call it to order. We are the witnesses." Ashki looked at the small, determined group, his army. He looked at the bell, their law. He turned his gaze to the cliff. "They will be at the cabin. High up," he said. "The path is guarded. They will be holding Little Star at the base, away from the meeting." "Then we split," Ruth said, her voice taking command. "Miguel, Natonis, Mabel, you are with me. We go for the path. We find the girl. We create noise. Ashki, you and the teacher." "We climb," Ashki said, pointing to the sheer, dark face of the cliff. "We go in the back way. We cut off the head." Eliza looked at the wall of stone, a 300-foot drop into darkness. She felt the sweetgrass braid in her pocket. She felt the pen. She nodded. Ruth and her team melted into the shadows of the path. Ashki led Eliza to the base of the cliff. He did not ask if she could do it. He simply began to climb. He was a spider, finding holds in the dark rock that were invisible. He would climb, secure his footing, then reach down a hand. She took it. Her hands were raw, her fingers numb. But she did not think of the height. She did not think of falling. She thought only of the next hold. His hand, strong, sure, pulling her up, the sweetgrass, her mother's pen, the vellum map sewn into her book. They were a ballast. She climbed. It took an hour, an eternity. They reached the ledge, their lungs burning, their muscles screaming. Below them, the world was a map of shadows. The cabin was 20 yards away, a dark shape against the moonlit sky. A plank bridge, wide enough for a wagon, crossed a deep chasm, connecting their ledge to the main cabin. Light spilled from the cabin's single window. Voices carried on the cold. Clear air, Brant's smooth baritone, Hale's clipped, military cadence, and Doyle's, a low, gravelly growl. Ashki put a finger to his lips. They crept forward. They reached the window. Inside, the scene was set. Silas Brant sat at a heavy table, a stack of gold coins beside his hand. Captain Royce Hale sat opposite, a formal, pre-signed army document before him, and standing by the hearth, holding Little Star, was Doyle. The girl was rigid, her eyes wide, her silence a terrible, sharp weapon. She was not crying. She was watching. On the table between Brant and Hale was the other half of the map, the bottom half, the one with the signatures and the lawyer's seal. "It is a simple transaction," Brant was saying, sliding the gold forward. "This gold, for that signature. You sign the land over to me, citing military necessity. I sign the water contract." "And the girl?" Hale asked, his voice betraying a hint of distaste. "Mr. Doyle's insurance," Brant said, smiling. "She keeps the heroic scout and his schoolteacher busy." "And the map?" "A trifle," Doyle growled. "We have the important half, the signatures. Brant will file a claim. This paper will prove his title. Her half, the location, is worthless without this half to make it legal." "Then sign," Brant said, pushing the pen. Hale picked it up. "Do not sign it, Captain." Eliza's voice was clear, cold, and carried into the room like a shard of ice. The three men froze. They spun. Ashki and Eliza were standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the moon. Hale's hand dropped to his pistol. Brant stood, knocking his chair over. Doyle's reaction was fastest. He grabbed Little Star, pulling her close, and put a long-bladed knife to her throat. "One move, Scout," Doyle hissed, his one eye blazing. "And she dies. Now drop the knife." Ashki let his knife clatter to the floor. "You are insane," Brant whispered, staring at Eliza. "You are ghosts." "We are not ghosts," Eliza said, walking slowly into the room. She held her satchel. "We are the law. This is not a negotiation. This is a hearing." Brant began to laugh, a low, stunned sound. "A hearing," You have no jurisdiction here, Miss Hart. My jurisdiction is the truth, she said. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the thick Shakespeare volume. She opened it to the inside cover, showing the vellum stitched to the leather. You have the signatures, but I have the location. The map is useless in 2 pieces, just like the law. Doyle's eye widened as he recognized the paper. And I have this, Eliza said. She pulled out the ledger page. A record of your payments to Pastor Blevins. A record of your payments for ditching services to destroy the town's water. She looked at Hale, whose face had gone the color of ash. And I have your letter, Captain, the one promising to protect Mr. Brandt's theft, the one that proves your conspiracy. Give me that! Hale lunged, his hand outstretched. A shot rang out. It was not from inside the cabin. It was from below. A single, powerful rifle shot that echoed up the canyon. Doyle, startled, looked toward the window. What was that? That, a new voice said from the doorway, was Miguel, shooting your signal horn. There are no reinforcements coming. Ruth Calder stood in the doorway, her rifle leveled. Behind her were Mabel, Natonis, and Miguel. Chaos. Doyle saw he was trapped. He threw Little Star at Eliza and drew his pistol. He fired, not at Ruth, but at Ashki. Ashki did not move. Natonis, his wounded arm useless, launched his entire body, a low, driving tackle, hitting Doyle at the knees. They crashed to the floor. Natonis's good hand reaching for the knife in Doyle's. Mabel lunged, snatching Little Star, pulling the girl into her arms, shielding her. At the same moment, Brandt pulled a small, silver derringer from his vest pocket. He was not aiming at Ruth. He was aiming at Captain Hale. "The witness must be silenced," he screamed. Hale saw the gun. He scrambled backward, away from the table, his eyes wide with terror. He stumbled, his boot catching the door jamb, and he fell backward, out of the cabin, onto the wide plank bridge. There was a sound of splintering, rotten wood. The bridge, weakened by the storm and Hale's sudden weight, collapsed. Hale fell. He let out a single, terrified shriek, but he did not fall far. One of the main support beams held, and he grabbed it, his hands catching, his legs dangling over a 300-foot drop. Ashki ran. He ran past Brandt, past the struggling Doyle and Natonis. He slid to his belly on the broken edge of the cabin floor. He looked down. Hale was clinging to the beam, his face a mask of sweat and terror. "Help me!" Hale screamed. "For God's sake, help me!" Ashki looked at the man who had destroyed his life, who had branded him a traitor, who had tried to have him killed. He saw the ghosts of the ambushed soldiers. He reached down. He grabbed Hale's wrist. "Give me your other hand," he commanded. Hale, weeping, let go with his other hand and grabbed Ashki's forearm. Ashki grunted, his muscles straining. He began to pull, the dead weight of the captain threatening to pull him over the edge. Miguel ran forward and grabbed Ashki's belt, anchoring him. Slowly, painfully, they hauled Hale up. They dragged him over the edge, and he collapsed onto the cabin floor, sobbing like a child. Ruth Calder had not moved. Her rifle was still trained on Silas Brandt. "Drop the gun, Mr. Brandt!" Brandt looked at the rifle. He looked at Mabel, holding the child. He looked at Miguel, his face dark with fury. He looked at the wreckage of his plan. He let the derringer fall from his hand. Natonis had Doyle's arm in a lock, his knee on the man's back. But Doyle was a snake. In one fluid motion, he twisted, slamming his head back into Natonis's face. Natonis cried out, his grip loosening. Doyle scrambled free, not for the door, but for the open chasm where the bridge had been. He leaped, grabbing a root, and slithered down the cliff face into the darkness, vanishing. He was gone. He had taken his half of the map with him. Silence. Hale was on the floor, weeping. Brandt stood by the table, defeated, his hands raised. Eliza walked to Captain Hale. "It is over," she said, her voice quiet. "Tell the truth. Why did you set up the ambush? Why did you name him a traitor?" Haley looked up, his face broken. He looked at Ashki, who stood, watching him, his hand still stinging from the rescue. "Money," Hale whispered. "Brant paid me. For the mineral rights. The patrol. They were not supposed to be there. It was a mistake. I had to cover it. I needed a scapegoat. Nez was the best scout I ever had. He was innocent. It was all me." The confession hung in the cold night air. Adani had walked up the path with the others. She stood in the doorway now, her face a mask of ancient strength. "The land has heard your words," she said. "The people have heard." "And the law has heard," Ruth Calder said. She produced a set of iron handcuffs. "Silas Brant, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of a federal officer, and kidnapping. Captain Hale, you are under arrest for murder and conspiracy." They led the two men out of the cabin. Eliza stepped onto the ledge. The moon was bright now. The entire valley was visible below, peaceful, scoured clean. Adani, Mabel, Miguel, Ruth, Natonis, and the few townspeople who had followed them gathered in a circle. Miguel and Natonis, with a grunt, rolled the heavy bronze bell from the cart and set it on the ledge. Eliza took Hale's letter, the confession, and laid it on the table. "We have lost half the map," she said, "but we have the truth, and we have witnesses." She found a fresh piece of paper in Brant's desk. "We will make our own record, a temporary injunction, citing the testimony given here, recognizing the community's rights to the winter warm water, until the federal marshal can arrive." She signed her name, Ruth signed hers. As a deputy, Adani made her mark, the soaring eagle. Miguel, Mabel, and Natonis signed. Even Pastor Blevins, who had arrived, pale and shaking, added his name. It was a new document, a new law, written in the open air, witnessed by the people. Eliza looked at the bell. She looked at Miguel's heavy mallet, left on the ground. She picked it up. She struck the bell once. A single deep bronze clang. The sound rolled off the cliff, down into the valley. A pure, clean note in the cold night. It was the sound of order, the sound of justice. It echoed, and from far below, a single coyote answered, its cry mixing with the bell. The trial was over. The walk down from the red cliff was silent, the world washed in the cold, gray light of dawn. The air was clean, stripped of all dust, and smelled of wet stone. Ashki and Natonis walked first, leading the prisoners. Brant was silent, his expensive suit ruined, his face a mask of disbelief. Hale was a broken man, his hands bound, his gaze fixed on the ground. Ruth and Miguel walked beside them, their rifles ready. Behind them came Eliza, Mabel, and Adani. Eliza was carrying little Star, who was fast asleep, her small body a heavy, precious weight. Mabel was carrying the satchel with Brant's ledger page and Hale's letter. They did not look like heroes. They looked like farmers after a harvest, exhausted and sore, their work done. They did not take the bell. They left it on the cliff, a bronze sentinel, to watch over the valley. When they entered Dusty Mesa, the town was emerging from the church, blinking in the new light. The storm had passed, leaving a trail of wreckage. Awnings were torn, windows were broken, but the town was whole. The people saw the procession. They saw the bound captain. They saw the railroad baron, a prisoner. No one cheered. The moment was too heavy. It was a time for work, not for celebration. Ruth Calder marched Brant and Hale to the jail, her small office, and locked them in the 2 cells. "I will send a rider for the federal marshal in Santa Fe," she said. "Until then, they are my problem." Mabel's boarding house became a hospital. Eliza laid Natonis on the dining room table, his face pale, and redressed his wound. Her hands were steady now. Her mother's medical training, a distant memory, came back to her with sharp clarity. She stitched a cut on Miguel's forehead. She bandaged the hands of a rancher who had been cut by flying glass. The town, wounded but not broken, gathered in the kitchen, drinking Mabel's coffee, speaking in low voices. The next day, the work of mending began. Eliza went to the livery stable, a large, drafty building that had survived the storm. The owner, a man whose garden she had helped save, gave it to her. "It is yours, ma'am," he said, "for the children." She, Mabel, and 2 other women spent the day with buckets of lye and whitewash. They scrubbed the floors. They whitewashed the splintered wood, the bright white paint covering the stains, making the space smell clean. Miguel built benches. By evening, it was no longer a stable. It was a school. While she worked, the new council met in Mabel's kitchen. Ruth Calder was at the table, writing her official report. Her handwriting was slow, careful. Every word was a nail. She was building a legal case, brick by brick. Hale's confession, the ledger, the letter. Miguel sat beside her, a lamp at his elbow. He had the Shakespeare book, open to the inside cover, with a draftsman's precision. He was copying the torn vellum. He was recreating the top half of the map, his hand strong and certain. "We will have a copy," he said. "And another. They cannot tear them all." Adani watched. She held the new document, the one written on the cliff, signed by them all. She had brought her own seal, a small, carved piece of soapstone. She pressed it into the wax at the bottom of the page. It was the mark of the elders, the eagle. The land was now a witness to the white man's paper. The 3rd day, the first water ceremony was held. It was not a ceremony, really. It was just an afternoon. Ruth unlocked the pump at the public well. The water was still low, but it was there. She tacked Eliza's water charter to the frame. The line formed. The ranchers and the miners, the ones who had brawled for scraps, now stood side by side. Each man filled his 1 barrel. Each woman, her bucket. The Navajo families, who had once been relegated to the back, were given their place in line, according to where they lived. There was no argument. The rules were the rules. The water was shared. The fever of greed had broken. That night, the council met again. Eliza brought a new document she had found in Brant's desk. It was not a ledger. It was a geological survey. "To Bia was not just for the engines," she said, her voice flat. She pointed to the report. "The warm water is a result of geothermal activity, and on the land directly north of it. There is a silver vein." The room was silent. Silver. The word was a curse. "He wanted it all," Miguel said, his voice thick. "The water to run the mine, the railroad to ship the ore. He would have enslaved this town." Mabel looked at Adani. "What do we do that is a fortune. It could build a real city here." Adani was quiet for a long time. "We have seen what the yellow metal does to men," she said, looking at the bars of the jail through the window. "This new metal, this silver, it is the same. It is a sickness of the ground. The water is life. The metal is a fever. It must be left. The ground must heal." Ruth nodded. "It is not our land to sell. The map, even torn, proves that." They voted. It was unanimous. The silver would stay in the earth. The water was the only treasure that mattered. The threat, however, was not gone. A week later, a freighter rode in from Santa Fe. He found Ruth in her office. "Saw a man you might know. Deputy," he said, drinking her coffee. "Hard case, missing an eye, name of Doyle." Ruth's hand tightened on her cup. "What about him?" "He was in a saloon, buying drinks, bragging. Said he was meeting with a lawyer, a man named Fitch. A snake. That one. Fitch is known for finding lost deeds, for clouding titles. Doyle was saying he had a paper that would make him richer than Brant." The thorn remained. Doyle was still out there. He had the other half of the map, the signatures. He was a loose thread, capable of unraveling everything they had built. But the town knew. The secret was out. They were watchful now. The next morning, Ashki was shoeing his horse when a small delegation approached him. It was the farmer whose child he had saved from the flash flood, the one who had doubted him. With him were 2 other ranchers. "Nez," the farmer said, twisting his hat in his hands. "We, the town, we have a proposition." Ashki just watched him, his hammer in his hand. "You know this land. You know the Rotes. You know the Navajo. We need a guide. We need a man to speak for us, to be the official liaison, to help us trade fairly, to keep the peace." He looked Ashki in the eye. "We are asking you $10 a week, and the respect of this town." Ashki looked at the men. He looked at their outstretched hands. He saw their fear, but also their honesty. He had left his people, a man without honor. He had been a ghost, moving between worlds, belonging to none. Now, this new, broken, hopeful world was asking him to be its foundation. He put down his hammer. He wiped his hand on his pants. He took the farmer's hand and shook it. "I will do it," he said. The school opened. The whitewashed stable was filled with the sounds of shuffling feet. 10 children sat on the new benches, miners' sons, ranchers' daughters. And in the front row, sitting straight and proud, was little Star. She was no longer silent. She was whispering to the girl next to her. Eliza stood at the front, a piece of new chalk in her hand. The blackboard was a sheet of wood, painted black. She looked at the children. She looked at Ashki, who was standing in the open doorway, watching. She turned to the board. She wrote, "My name is Eliza Hart." She paused. Then, below it, she wrote, "My name is Tuluv to Yanut Ihi." She turned to the class. "It means she who brings water," she said, her voice strong. "Both are my name. Both are true." She looked at little Star. "Today, we learn our first lesson." She wrote on the board, the chalk singing, the words clear and bright. "Water is life. Justice is work." The town healed. The work was hard. The justice was, as her mother had said, a kind of labor. It required daily discipline. They began to build the new school, not in town, but out on the high plain, a mile from the warm springs of Tubi'a, on land that Adani's people had formerly deeded to the town's children. It was a shared act. Ashki, Miguel, and Natonis framed the walls. Ranchers hauled the lumber, the railroad, under new management from Santa Fe, wanting to distance itself from Brant, donated the glass for the windows. The work was hard. The peace was fragile. Nature itself seemed to want to test them. An early thaw, a freak warm wind, sent a sudden rush of water down from the mountains. The small, rebuilt irrigation ditch, the one that watered the town's gardens, was overwhelmed. The small dam of rock and earth began to crumble. The alarm was raised. It was not a bell this time. It was a shout. And everyone came, not in 2 factions, but as one. Ashki and his men, ranchers, miners, they worked side by side, throwing rocks, hauling sandbags, fighting the brown, churning water. They worked for 2 hours, shoulder to shoulder, covered in mud, shouting orders, saving the ditch. They saved their water, together. That evening, Eliza was in the temporary school, her office, packing the last of the books to be moved to the new building. The old, broken desk of Pastor Davies, the one salvaged from the burned cabin, was the last piece. It was scarred, but solid. She emptied the drawers. In the back of the bottom drawer, her fingers felt a loose piece of wood, a false bottom. She pried it open with her knife. Inside was a small, tin box. It was not the Bible. It was not a map. It held the pastor's personal effects, a small, tarnished silver cross, a tintype of a woman she did not recognize, and a small bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon. She looked at the top letter. It was addressed to the pastor. The postmark was from Santa Fe, but the stamp, it was a rare 1-cent provisional stamp. She recognized it from her Boston education. It was a collector's item. But more than that, it was a clue. It was a link to the pastor's past, to his life before Dusty Mesa. She thought of Doyle. She thought of his stolen half of the map. She thought of the snake lawyer, Fitch. This was a thread, a way to trace the pastor's connections in Santa Fe. A way, perhaps, to find the man who had torn the law in two. The fight was not over. It was just beginning. The new schoolhouse stood on the high plain, its raw pine boards smelling of sawdust and promise. It stood a quarter-mile from the springs of Tubiyah, where steam rose from the earth, a soft, white breath in the cold. Clear morning. The sky was a hard, blue shell. Winter was coming. But here, at the springs, the grass was still green. 2 ceremonies were held. They did not happen at the same time. They happened beside each other. 2 rivers flowing in the same valley. First, at the edge of the springs, Adani led her people. She stood on a flat, warm rock, her face to the rising sun. She held a basket of blue cornmeal. She spoke, her voice not loud, but carrying in the thin air, a prayer of thanks to the earth for the water, for the life that endures. She blessed the ground, the children, and the new building. The scent of burning sage and juniper rose, clean and sharp, mixing with the mineral smell of the steam. Then, an hour later, Eliza stood on the new porch of the schoolhouse. The bell, the one from the cliff, was now hung in a strong new belfry. Miguel had built it. He struck it once, a single, deep, bronze clang that rolled across the valley, not in anger, but in welcome. The entire town was there, the ranchers, the miners, their faces clean. Mabel, Ruth, and Miguel, standing together. The Navajo families, Ashki among them, his arms crossed, watching. The children, including Little Star, ran inside, their boots thumping on the new floor. Eliza looked at the crowd. They were not 2 peoples. They were a community, raw and new, forged in fire and bound by choice. The smell of sage from Adani's blessing still hung in the air, mixing with the new, rich smell of coffee Mabel was serving from a large pot. Inside the schoolhouse, the work began. The sound of chalk on the new slate board, the sound of Little Star. Reading her first full sentence was a new kind of prayer. That afternoon, the federal marshal from Santa Fe finally rode in, his face weary. He listened to Ruth Calder for 2 hours. He read the ledger page. He read Hale's letter. He read the confession. He took custody of Brant and the sobbing, broken Hale. "This is the most solid case of conspiracy and fraud I have seen in 20 years, the marshal said, drinking Ruth's coffee. Brant will not see the sun as a free man again. Hale will testify against him. In exchange for his life, he will lose his commission, his name, his world. He is already a ghost." He left 2 days later, his prisoners in chains. The town was, for the first time, quiet. The threat was gone, but not all of it. Ruth had led a search of the Red Cliff after Doyle's escape. Natonis, his eyes sharp, had been the one to find it. 20 feet down the cliff face, snagged on a thorned bush, was the other half of the map, the bottom half, with the signatures. Doyle, in his desperate animal panic to escape, had lost his prize. He was still out there, a man with nothing but a grudge, a snake in the grass. But his fangs, his legal claim, were gone. Miguel, his hand now as delicate as it was strong, had taken the 2 pieces. He had backed them with fine linen. He had stitched them together, the seam a careful, honest scar. That evening, Ashki and Eliza stood alone in the new, quiet schoolhouse. The moon was rising, filling the windows with pale, clean light, the map, whole again, hung in a frame of dark pine on the wall. It was the first thing the children would see every day. Eliza stood before it, tracing the lines with her finger. The stitched seam, the mark of the eagle, the pastor's signature. Ashki came and stood beside her. He did not touch her. He just looked at the map. "It is whole," he said. "It is," she said. "The law is whole." He looked at her, his eyes clear in the moonlight. "We are whole." Eliza placed her hand on the glass. "Over the springs. We will keep the water." Ashki placed his hand beside hers, over the mark of his grandfather. "And we will keep the word." Their hands rested, side by side, a silent, binding oath. Their promise made in the storm was now solid as the wall it hung on. Freedom, they both knew, was not a gift. It was this. It was the daily, quiet work of holding things together. It was a skill, like mending a map, like building a school, like love. Later, Eliza sat at her new desk. The room smelled of pine and chalk. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from a drawer. She dipped her pen in the ink. It was not her mother's pen. That was his now. This was a new one, plain and practical. She began to write a letter, not to be sent, but to be known. "My dearest mother," she wrote, "I have done what you asked. I am teaching them fairness, but I am teaching them in a way you never could. I am not teaching them to be equal. I am teaching them that they already are. You sent me here to find my purpose. Instead, I found my people, and I found my name. I used to think courage was the absence of fear. I know now it is not. It is the choice to stand, even when you are shaking. I am no longer your shield. Mother, I have become a voice. I have chosen the hands that will teach me, and they are strong, and they are kind, and they are true." She did not sign it. She folded it and placed it inside the back of her Shakespeare, beside the memory of the stitches. Outside, in the cold, bright moonlight, Ashki stood on the porch. He had his knife in one hand, and her mother's pen in his pouch. He looked at the heavy pine lintel above the door. He began to carve. He was not a man of letters. He was a man of symbols. He worked for an hour, the blade cutting deep and true. When he was finished, the mark was there, a blessing on the house, a sign for all who entered. The spiral of Hoso, the path of balance, the world, set right. The story of Dusty Mesa did not end there. It continued. The winter school, as it came to be known, thrived. And in the long, hot summers, when the children were on the ranches, the schoolhouse did not close. It became the summer council. Adani, Ruth, Mabel, Miguel, and Ashki. They met once a month, with the ranchers and the miners. They settled disputes. They managed the water. They were not a government. They were a community, governing itself. The story closes, but it does not end. The work goes on. The threat of men like Doyle is always out there. The fever of silver and gold is always in the earth. But as Eliza looked out the window, the steam from the warm springs rising like a soft prayer, she was not afraid. She watched Ashki walk from the porch, his shadow long in the new morning. He was not a ghost. He was her guide, and she was his. If the bad men return tomorrow, we have the words, we have the water, and we have each other. Thank you for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with me. If you enjoyed our journey to Dusty Mesa, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from in the world. I would love to connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and like this video. It also helps so much if you hit that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more folks.